Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Horror Mine. My name is Vic Shy, and this is the Scare Score, where I break down horror movies and rate them on how scary I think they are. Let's briefly address the elephant in the room of a crazy situation that just took place. My YouTube channel was hacked and stolen from me. It happened on the fateful day of Saturday, October 5th, right after the upload of the When Evil Lurks Scare Score, and evil was lurking indeed. I tried logging into YouTube Studios and found that I was completely locked out of the account. The hackers changed my Gmail account password and all the authentication methods to get into the account. The channel was deleted soon after, and the Horror Mine was lost for 4 days. Thankfully, I was finally able to get into contact with YouTube support, and they were able to successfully recover the account. I want to give a massive shout out to fellow YouTuber Mortuary Gaming. His channel was also hacked, and he personally reached out to me with the information I needed to get the channel back. Y'all make sure to check out his channel and thank him for all his help. These past few days have been extremely stressful, and for a second there, I thought I would never get the channel back. The timing of this happening in the beginning of October is a bit ironic and spooky, earning this crazy situation the highly coveted and ultra rare scare score of 100%. But it's still early in the spooky season, and our HHM Halloween Horror Mine celebration is still underway. And to celebrate the special Halloween season and getting the channel back, I thought it'd be fitting to get an awesome new profile picture. This was designed by the extremely talented Ghostiyo, who did an incredible job. I wanted a profile picture to reflect the heart and soul of the channel, Asian horror films. The oval-shaped mirror is the one featured on the cursed videotape in Ringu. Toshio Saeki from Ju-on is wearing the Kagutaba mask from Noroi the Curse, and Kayako Saeki's hands are coming out and grabbing the side of the mirror. The background is Samara's well, as shown in the cursed videotape from The Ring. I chose Samara's well because the contrast of colors helps make the design pop. A massive thanks to Ghostiyo for making this incredible design. Y'all can check out more of Ghostiyo's work on X and Patreon. Links in the description down below. In this special HHM episode of the Scare Score, I'll be going over the classic 2002 Japanese horror film, Ju-on: The Grudge. I covered this film on Halloween 3 years ago, and that video is how the Horror Mine came to be what it is today. I'll be going over the events that take place throughout the film while rating the scares on how scary they are or attempt to be. This is the movie that traumatized my entire childhood and adult life, but it also created my love for Asian horror films. But how scary is it? Sit back and relax and join me as we explore Ju-on: The Grudge and tally up the Scare Score. Our movie begins with the iconic opening text explaining the deadly curse. Ju-on, the curse of one who dies in the grip of a powerful rage. It gathers and takes effect in the places that person was alive. Those who encounter it die, and a new curse is born. We are then shown some disturbing images accompanied by a haunting piano tune. There is a good portion of people who find the film's story and presentation confusing, so I think this basic explanation should make everything easier to follow. A man named Takeo Saeki is biting his nails, and his fingers are covered in blood. He is doing some arts and crafts as a cat meows in the background. He grabs the cat, and we hear some intense squelching action as the cat screeches off screen. His son Toshio is drawing and retreats into a closet. Takeo then opens a box cutter and approaches his bloodied wife Kayako before the title appears on screen. This backstory was explored in the first film of the series, Ju-on: The Curse. Kayako was in love with Toshio's elementary teacher named Mr. Kobayashi. Takeo found out his wife was in love with another man by reading her diary and became enraged. He brutally deleted Kayako along with their family cat Mar. Toshio retreated into the closet and was never found. This created a deadly curse called a Ju-on and turned Kayako into a powerful, vengeful spirit known in Japan as an Onryo. Anyone who steps foot inside the house becomes cursed and haunted by the spirits of the Saeki family before being consumed by it. I covered the entire Ju-on series on the channel 3 years ago, and I highly recommend checking it out to fully understand this complex story. From the opening text to the title sequence, this intro is highly unnerving and haunting. The piano tune creates a creepy yet sad atmosphere. What we see taking place is highly disturbing, especially since we don't fully see or understand what's going on. on. It's presented in a manner that feels almost like a dream, an excellent way to open the film that perfectly sets the tone for what follows. The first chapter is titled Rika. The film tells its story in chapters in non-chronological order. We meet our main character Rika, a volunteer at a social welfare center. Her supervisor, Mr. Hirohashi, tells her to go look after a patient because he can't reach the regular caregiver, Mr. Takahashi. Rika is uncomfortable with going alone because she's just a volunteer. He just hands her the papers and walks off. Rika goes to the house and feels something strange when walking in front of it. This is the house from the opening scene and currently owned by the Tokunaga family. It's a bright and sunny day, but the odd soundtrack gives this scene a slight unsettling feel, as if something's wrong. She rings the doorbell, waits about 2 entire seconds, and then decides to let herself in. Reviewing Japanese horror films on YouTube is like walking on thin ice nowadays. I can't show too many scenes or audios from the film, so I'll try my best to capture the true feel of it.
Gomen kudasai!
The house is a complete mess and she doesn't get a response when announcing herself. A hand appears and eerily starts scratching the door. It turns out to be the patient named Miss Sachi. Rika introduces herself and Sachi just looks like she hopes the horror mine doesn't get hacked again. Rika then notices a massive shit stain on the floor.
Aya, Sachi!
She gets Granny all cleaned up and starts cleaning the house. She finds a strange family picture that was torn up and taped back together. This is the Saeki family seen in the film's intro, and Kayako's face is eerily cut out. She goes upstairs and there is a distinct change in mood. She hears scratching noises coming from a closet that is completely taped shut. A cat is heard meowing and she removes the tape. Inside the closet, she finds Toshio holding Mar and recognizes him from the photo. She calls Mr. Hirohashi and tells him about the strange discovery. The phone rings again and a woman named Hitomi leaves a voicemail looking for someone named Kazumi. She asks about Sachi, but Rika doesn't pick up the phone for some reason. Toshio is now creepily staring at her from upstairs and says his name is Toshio. He then looks in Sachi's direction, who seems to be talking to herself. She keeps repeating, "I told her," again and again. Rika feels a strange presence behind her as the music starts to intensify. Sachi looks up completely terrified and covers her face. We hear the iconic and horrifying croaking noise as a black spirit appears directly on top of Sachi.
No, not Sachi.
The spirit then looks directly at Rika and she passes out with Toshio standing behind her. This was a very creepy and scary scene that gives us our first real look at the film's terrifying spirit, Kayako Saeki. The atmosphere was really well crafted and things gradually got weirder and scarier as the scene progressed. There are a couple of cliches thrown in there, but nothing crazy. The scene ends on a terrifying note and introduces us to the iconic croaking sound that traumatizes me to this day. The next chapter is titled Katsuya and takes place sometime before Rika's chapter. We meet the residents of the house, married couple Katsuya and Kazumi Tokunaga. Katsuya is fast asleep, but Kazumi is woken up by the sound of running footsteps and rummaging downstairs. They find the house a mess the next morning and Kazumi thinks it was Sachi, Katsuya's mom, and her mother-in-law. Sachi is sound asleep and we see she has black hair in this chapter, not gray, meaning she's been terrorized by the spirits to the point her hair lost all its color. That or she spent the past 4 years in the Oval Office. Katsuya heads off to work and Kazumi reminds him that his sister is coming over for dinner. Kazumi takes a midday nap and is woken up by the sound of running footsteps. She thinks it was Sachi, but she's sitting in her usual spot. The footsteps are heard in the hall and she sees small handprints on the door. Toshio's head can be seen peering over the stairs and looking at her.
Cuckoo.
She finds the black cat and it runs up the stairs before being grabbed by Toshio's ghostly hands. She follows him into a bedroom and we hear a cat meow before she screams in horror. I've never found Toshio necessarily scary, but this is by far his scariest scene in the entire series. It takes place during the day, but the suspense is very well done. The best part of the scene is seeing Toshio staring at Kazumi from the stairs. The reveal showing his face is well done and unnerving. Katsuya comes home and calls out to his wife, asking if Hitomi is here yet. He tries talking to his mom and she slowly looks at the same corner of the room as the previous chapter. This shows that she is being haunted pretty much 24/7. Poor Granny. He finds Kazumi in bed upstairs completely frozen in fear. She tries to speak but no words come out. He tries calling an ambulance and Toshio's spirit runs directly behind him. He looks inside the closet and Toshio is behind him again looking at Kazumi. Toshio screeches like a cat and appears from behind the bed. He meows and quickly disappears before Kazumi just dies. Katsuya bites his nails and his expression completely changes to a very sinister look. He is now possessed by the spirit of Toshio's father, Takeo Saeki. His sister Hitomi lets herself into the house and possessed Katsuya is seen bringing Kazumi's dead body into another room. The door slams shut, which lures Hitomi upstairs and she briefly hears a strange screeching noise. She gets scared by Katsuya sitting on the stairs and he says Kazumi went out. He tells her to leave, then starts whispering under his breath. He says she had another man and that's not my child over and over. He seemingly comes to and kicks her out of the house. He then hears the same screeching noise before cracking his neck and slowly walking upstairs. The camera pans over to a window as Katsuya goes into a room and we see something terrifying. This was a good scare scene and overall a very decent and suspenseful chapter. The film is slowly starting to reveal bits and pieces about the terrifying curse and its disturbing origin. Everything is presented in a slow, suspenseful way that manages to get under my skin. That last shot of Kayako appearing in the window is the earliest memory of my introduction to Ju-on as a kid. The way she suddenly appears and just eerily stands there is a scene that has stuck with me for a long time. The next chapter is titled Hitomi and takes place after the Katsuya chapter. Hitomi calls Katsuya to check on him and leaves the same voicemail that Rika heard during her chapter. I know that some people were put off by the non-chronological storytelling, but I think it's brilliant and adds to the film's mystique. Hitomi is getting off work and is now cursed because she stepped foot inside of the Saeki house. She walks alone in a hallway and hears a strange noise like someone dragging plastic. We don't truly find out until later, but this is the noise of Kayako crawling on the ground as she was wrapped in plastic when she died. It's truly an if you know kind of scare and gives me chills just hearing it. Someone goes into the next bathroom stall making the same dragging noise. She picks up a call from Katsuya and hears Kayako croaking. Someone bangs on the stall and she hears croaking coming from behind her. She drops her teddy bear keychain and when she goes to pick it up, Kayako slowly comes out of the stall while croaking. Not even 5 minutes into this chapter and Hitomi is already being relentlessly tormented by Kayako. Hitomi tells a security guard about the incident and he goes to investigate. She is left alone in the office and watches him from the security feed. Kayako's shadow grabs a hold of the security guard and he disappears. Another way to become cursed is to encounter a cursed individual. Kayako isn't playing any games, so the guard coming into contact with Hitomi was an insta-kill. Hitomi rushes to her apartment building and gets into the elevator. A young girl runs up to the elevator as it closes, barely missing a deadly encounter. As the elevator rises, Toshio can be seen on every floor staring at her, which is such a cool and creative scare. She runs into her apartment and feels relieved. She gets a call from Katsuya who says he's outside of her building. She tells him she's on the 7th floor and he immediately rings the doorbell. She sees him through the peephole but he disappears when she opens the door. Kayako's croaking then emits from the phone. She runs into her bedroom and goes under her blanket where she feels safest. She turns on the TV but the broadcast slowly becomes distorted. She tries turning off the TV as the woman's face turns ghostly and she starts to croak before it shuts off. She hides under the blanket and the little teddy bear keychain she dropped suddenly appears in her hand. Something rises under the blanket, not unlike what I wake up to every morning. The music becomes extremely intense as she gets pulled by something and we get one of the most iconic scares of all time. Hitomi then gets pulled into oblivion and disappears. This chapter is fairly brief, yet there is so much going on and it's absolutely intense. It's basically Hitomi being relentlessly tormented from start to finish. It seems like she never even has time to breathe, which is what makes it so terrifying. Just when she thinks she's safe, Kayako pulls a big ol' psych and goes right back to scaring her. The scares in this chapter are so creative and just build on top of each other until the horrifying and iconic blanket scene, showing us just how powerful this deadly curse is. A truly excellent chapter. The next chapter is titled Toyama. The chapter begins with Rika's supervisor, Mr. Hirohashi, showing up to the house to check on her. He lets himself into the house, also letting the curse into his body. He goes over to Sachi and realizes she's DEAD. Sachi died with her hands over her face, which is a haunting visual. He finds Rika in the corner, frozen in fear, and calls the police. We meet two detectives named Nakagawa and his partner Igarashi. They try calling the house phone and hear it ringing from the attic. They go into the attic and discover the dead bodies of the Tokunagas. Rika is recovering in the hospital and doesn't hear her friend Mariko calling her.
ka?
Pikachu.
She is questioned by Detective Nakagawa and tells him about Toshio. He says that the Tokunagas didn't have a kid and looks uneasy. The detectives look over the entire case and we learn that every family that has lived in the house has either died or disappeared. He says that Takeo Saeki was found dead in the middle of the road shortly after killing his wife Kayako. In Ju-on the Curse, we see Takeo getting taken out by Kayako's spirit. Toshio was never found, but we can confirm that he was also consumed by the curse. We then meet a man named Yuji Toyama and his young daughter Izumi. Toyama's storyline is where the plot and curse can get a little confusing. However, Toyama's story is somehow beautiful and sad at the same time. He is approached by Detective Igarashi and we learn that he was the detective in charge of the Saeki case that happened 5 years ago. He is the only person remaining who worked on the case and just wants to be left alone. Rika confirms that Toshio is the boy she saw in the house, and Detective Nakagawa tells her he went missing 5 years ago. At the social welfare center, an employee discovers Mr. Hirohashi's dead body under the sink. This scene isn't scary whatsoever, and I wish his death didn't happen off screen. As Rika leaves, Toyama is brought into the station to help with the case. The detectives learn about Mr. Hirohashi and step out, leaving Toyama alone. He is watching the security feed from the night Hitomi went missing. He sees the security guard get pulled into the bathroom and Kayako's shadow walks into the hall. The shadow walks out of view, then suddenly covers the entire screen. Toyama looks away in fear and is possibly wondering what he's gotten himself back into. Although Kayako's shadow doesn't look too scary here, the intense look in her eyes is pretty unsettling. While she sleeps, Rika is woken up by Toshio via jump scare. Kayako then appears directly on top of her, emitting her signature croak as Toshio sits on the bed scratching his knees. A brief but solid scare that gives us a clear look at Kayako in her terrifying Onryo form. Toyama realizes the house is cursed and shows up with jugs of gasoline to burn it down. A light shines from behind him and he hears girls talking on the other side. It's now completely bright out and a girl named Izumi comes running down the stairs. She turns around and looks at him with a shocked expression on her face. They briefly look at one another before she runs out of the house. The voice of several other girls can be heard upstairs. At the same time, the detectives are looking for Toyama at his apartment. Toyama walks upstairs and sees 3 schoolgirls in a bright room. They see something and all scream for ice cream before the light disappears. A loud thud is heard in the room and Kayako appears crawling on the ground. Toyama retreats downstairs completely terrified and the detectives arrive. Toyama rushes out of the house in fear as the detectives witness Kayako crawling down the stairs. Kayako slowly approaches them and they are consumed by the curse. Kayako seems to be getting more comfortable with her looks and is showing up a lot more. Even still, the film purposely refrains from showing her too much and we only get brief glimpses of her. I think this makes the scare so much more effective. Also, the way she slowly appeared in view and turned her head at Toyama was very creepy. This was a solid scare scene and overall a very good chapter. It introduces some very interesting concepts about the curse that include manipulating time and reality. This entire chapter has a really sad undertone to it, and this carries over into the next chapter titled Izumi. This chapter takes place several years into the future and officially introduces us to Izumi Toyama, Detective Toyama's daughter who's now in high school. She stops to look at a missing poster of the 3 girls who died off screen in the previous chapter. This may seem a little confusing, but Toyama actually witnessed his daughter from the future inside of the Saeki house with her friends. He didn't actually time travel, but the curse chose to show him that moment in time. Izumi saw her father from the past when she turned around, and they briefly exchanged looks while simultaneously being in 2 different moments in time. Izumi ran out of the house and her father witnessed the death of her 3 friends at the hands of Kayako, which is why they're now missing. Their deaths were also heard off screen at the end of Ju-on the Curse 2. It's a trippy concept to try and understand and it's never truly explained. Just like it's never explained how Toyama survived 5 years after having investigated the Saeki house incident. The curse makes its own rules and works truly mysteriously. At school, Izumi is upset because her pictures weren't posted on the school board. On her way home, she walks past another flyer of her missing friends and runs away. She comes home and finds her mother, who is still mourning the death of her father. We don't exactly know what happened to him, but it's clear that he was consumed by the curse sometime after encountering Kayako in the house. However, we do hear a news broadcast that reveals the fate of Rika Nishina. Rika had been declared missing, and it appears that her body was recently found deceased. I think this is some cool storytelling, and love how everything is being presented in seemingly disjointed bits and pieces. Izumi goes into her room and feels a strange presence all around her. She closes her curtains and appears frightened by something. Sometime later, their professor finally has the photos with Izumi developed. Her friends Miyuki and Chiharu decide to take the photos to her. They go to her apartment, and Izumi's mom also seems to have been affected by the curse. Izumi has shut herself in and covered all of her windows with newspaper. Izumi reveals she is being haunted by the spirits of her three friends, Saori, Chiaki, and Anayo. She says she was with them the day they went missing but didn't tell anyone. It was Saori's idea to visit the haunted Saeki house, and Izumi felt something strange even before they went inside. She says that they're coming for her and starts screaming at them to close the curtains. Her mom reveals that Yuji Toyama behaved the exact same way and shut himself in before he passed away, something that Izumi has no idea about. Her friends look at the pictures and see Izumi's eyes along with the three missing girls blacked out in all the pictures. Chiharu gets spooked and takes off running. I wouldn't call this scene or this chapter scary so far. It just has an atmosphere that feels really sad and empty. Izumi walks into the living room and sees the spirit of her father. He is trying to say something to her but can't say any words. She tells him that she saw him that day in the Saeki house before waking up. She finds some of the newspaper on the bed and holes in her window. The spirits of her friends suddenly appear and slowly start coming after her. She retreats into the living room, and I always found it hilarious how she tries to put things in front of a sliding door. They slide the door open and easily bypass her defenses. Izumi's head is then suddenly grabbed by Kayako. Izumi is then pulled into the abyss as her and her dad's face appear in the dark. This was a decent scare scene that was definitely enhanced by Kayako's sudden appearance. The three ghost girls didn't look scary, and the makeup budget definitely went to Kayako. I also wasn't too fond of the floating heads at the end of the scene because they clearly look like paper. The final chapter is titled Kayako and continues where Rika's story left off. Rika is at work and is caring for an old man named Mr. Saito, portrayed by a Japanese horror movie OG, Isao Yatsu. Mr. Saito is playing peekaboo with an unseen Toshio. There are quite a few staples when it comes to Japanese horror films: creepy children, high school students, deadly curses, and shower scenes. As Rika washes her hair, we see a ghostly hand on the back of her head, another iconic horror movie scare scene that made me afraid of taking showers for years to come. Rika links back up with Mariko, and it's been a while since they've seen each other, meaning that while Rika is still cursed, the curse has chosen not to consume her just yet. They have lunch at a fancy schmancy restaurant, and a cat brushes against Rika's leg. She looks under the table and sees Toshio creepily sitting there, a brief but very effective scare because of its unexpected nature. Rika goes home and realizes that she's still being haunted. That night, Rika is woken up to her room filled with several black cats. The phone rings and she wakes up from what appears to have been a nightmare. She goes to pick up the phone and briefly sees Toshio in the corner of the room. She gets a call from Mariko, who's doing a home visit at one of her students' houses. Rika hears a cat in the background and realizes Mariko is at the Saeki house. We see Toshio sitting behind her holding his cat Mar. Toshio appears as he did when he was alive, but this is another one of the curse's tricks. Rika rushes over to the house and Mariko goes looking for Toshio, who disappeared. She goes upstairs and Toshio can be seen in his ghostly form. Rika goes into the house and sees her friend's shoes. She grabs a flashlight off the floor and hears the same screeching noise as Hitomi and Katsuya. This is the curse's way of lowering its victim's defense by 2 stat points. She makes her way upstairs, which I think is the deadliest part of the house. She looks for Mariko using a flashlight that looks like it's got a total of 5 lumens. She hears a noise coming from the closet and sees Mariko being dragged into the attic. She hears a crunching noise before Kayako appears and quickly starts crawling towards her. Rika rushes downstairs and Kayako appears in the reflection as she runs past the mirror. Rika looks into the mirror and realizes that she's been able to see the spirit spirits through the gaps between her fingers, just like Sachi and Saito did. Knowing that,
I'm not putting my freaking hands up to my face!
She does though and gets exactly what the doctor ordered, a dose of Kayako looking back at her. Kayako's head then briefly pops out from inside her shirt and then disappears. She hears the screeching once more and sees the door upstairs opening. We hear Kayako crawling her way to the stairs as she emits her iconic and terrifying croak. What makes this specific moment so effective is that we don't see her yet, but we know exactly what's about to pop around the corner, and it ain't good. The first thing to appear is Kayako's horrifying face covered in blood. She slowly makes her way down the stairs and her body is wrapped in the plastic she died in. She twitches her head and contorts her arms, all while staring directly at Rika. Instead of her iconic croak, she emits an odd moan that sounds like multiple souls crying out for help, and it sounds just as unnerving. She then emits a single moan that sounds absolutely horrifying to listen to. Rika covers her face and sees her own ghostly self looking back at her. It turns out that Rika's own Onryo spirit, not Kayako, has been haunting her and everyone else in the film the entire time. This is because Rika is set to suffer the same terrible fate as Kayako and become another instrument of the curse. Yet another confusing element of the curse is Rika's own spirit was retroactively haunting her past self because of the curse. Takeo Saeki makes his way down the stairs and does exactly to Rika what he did to Kayako, giving birth to a new curse as Toshio watches from above. Sometime later, we see the empty city streets filled with flyers of missing people. The curse has seemingly wiped out a large portion of the population. It's unclear exactly when this scene takes place. This staircase will appear at the end of Ju-on the Grudge 2, leading me to believe this takes place far into the future, even after Izumi's chapter years later. In the film's final scene, we see a dead Rika bloodied and wrapped in plastic. Her hair is much longer, resembling that of Kayako's. The camera slowly zooms in on her face before her eyes open and she emits the terrifying croak as the movie ends. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Ju-on the Grudge. My friends, rewatching this film for this episode reminded me why I was traumatized for years. I literally had nightmares about Kayako haunting me for years, even into adulthood. Every time I had a nightmare involving Kayako, I wouldn't want to go back to sleep because I didn't want to experience another nightmare. That is how effectively scary and impactful this film was and still is. Ju-on the Grudge's entire presentation feels creative and unique. Takashi Shimizu's unorthodox way of storytelling is brilliant and helps make this film truly one of a kind. The unique story and presentation translate right into the film's scare scenes. There are numerous terrifying scenes constantly throughout the film, but without a doubt, the most terrifying aspect of the film and the entire series is Kayako Saeki, expertly portrayed by actress Takako Fuji. She brings and dedicates so much to the role and has made Kayako one of the scariest and most iconic horror movie ghosts of all time. There are a couple cliches here and there and a few aspects that feel a little dated. However, none of those things are enough to bring the movie down. Ju-on the Grudge is an absolutely horrifying film that oozes with creativity and terrifying concepts. It's a horror film that traumatized an entire generation and gave us terrifying and iconic scares that hold up even to this day, earning Ju-on the Grudge a perfect scare score of 100%, making it only the third film to earn a perfect score in over 75 episodes, and it truly earns it in my opinion. The audience scare score voted on and averaged by channel members is 79%. The scariest scene in the film was a real toss-up between Hitomi's death and Kayako's iconic stair-crawling scene, but I'm going to have to give this one to Hitomi. Kayako crawling down the stairs is truly horrifying and iconic, but it doesn't offer the same level of suspense and intensity as Hitomi's death. Hitomi is relentlessly tormented by Kayako throughout the entire chapter. The bit where the TV becomes distorted and starts emitting the croaking noise is downright nightmare fuel. Her torment culminates in what I believe to be an equally iconic scare, the mythical fighter bedsheet Kayako. That moment let everyone watching know that we are never safe, even in bed under our bed sheets, and that alone is truly terrifying. I want to give a big shout out to our newest Golden Kayako member, Samantha T. You've joined a truly elite group of J-horror fanatics fanatics that proudly wear the Golden Kayako title. Thank you to the rest of the Golden Kayako Club and the rest of our channel members for supporting the channel. But as always, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Thank you all for tuning in, and I cannot wait to see y'all right back here in the Horror Mine. Y'all stick around.